Well, thanks for staying with us. It's time to talk business. President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the appointment of Mr. Aminu Umaru Sadiq as the new Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, NSIA. Now, this was revealed by Mr. Yunusa Tanko Abdullahi, Special Advisor, Media and Communications to the Finance Minister in the statement made available to newsmen. The President also appointed Mr. Kolawole Owudunni and Mrs. B.C. Makoju as Executive Directors. The appointment of the new MD and CEO follows the expiration of the tenure of Mr. Uche Oji, whose tenure expired on September 30, 2022, after serving 2 5-year terms following his appointment on October 2nd, 2012. Now, Nigeria's crude oil revenue jumped to 11 trillion naira in the first 6 months of 2022. Well, that's according to the latest data from the NBS Foreign Trade Statistics for the second quarter of the year. And according to the report from the National Bureau of Statistics, this was at an 83% increase in crude oil earnings from 6 trillion naira recorded in the first half of 2021. A breakdown of crude oil exports in the first half of 2022 shows that in the first quarter of the year, crude oil valued at 5.6 trillion naira was exported by the country, increasing to 5.9 trillion naira in the second quarter. In comparison, in the first quarter of 2021, the NBS says Nigeria earned 2 trillion naira from crude oil exports and 4 trillion naira in the second quarter. Meanwhile, the amount spent by Nigeria on servicing Eurobonds and diaspora bonds has risen by 85.67% between the first and the second quarter of 2022. An analysis of data on actual external debt service payments from the Debt Management Office DMO shows that Nigeria spent $246.16 million on servicing its foreign bonds in the first quarter of the year. By the second quarter of the same year, the total debt service costs on the loans rose to $457.01 million. A breakdown for Q2 shows that the country spent $148.57 million on Eurobonds and $308.44 million on diaspora bonds. It should be recalled that the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, told newsmen earlier that there was no plan to enter the Eurobond market in 2022. According to Mrs. Ahmed, the proceeds from the $4 billion acquired from the Eurobond market the previous year would be used to fund fuel subsidy in the country. But to other stories now, the Nigerian Agribusiness Group is joining efforts with stakeholders in the agriculture sector towards improving standards. This is geared at amplifying the quality of agricultural exports in line with acceptable standards and reducing export rejects. Our correspondent, Lara Afolayo, tells us more.
This stakeholders consultative meeting is themed Unlocking our agri-commodity market, setting the appropriate value for Nigeria's agri-produce exports. It is a collaborative effort of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as other stakeholders, to assist the MSME industry with needed skills for production of agricultural commodities in line with globally acceptable standards.
People want to be sure of the quality, the sanitation, the hygiene of what you are selling. And if they cannot be sure, then you can't have access to their markets. We can play locally and manage and do what we want to do. But if we want to sell internationally, if we want to be competitive in agriculture globally, then we must comply and align ourselves to global benchmarks for standards.
Nigeria's agricultural commodities have not been globally competitive despite the country's natural endowments, and the gathering urgently seeks that standards be enhanced for better non-oil export earnings.
We have taken the initiative to bring stakeholders together, both in the public and private sectors, so that we can craft a policy that will enable Nigeria compete favorably in Africa and across the world.
Modern-day business requirements seek that global benchmarks and standards are complied with in cross-border trade, as quality of goods are extremely important to the international community. Institutions and policies to drive this are a core part of the process against the backdrop of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement's implementation.
Even when it is developed as a policy and handed over and worked with the ministry to to get a Federal Executive Council approval, all hands must be on deck to implement this. As hard as this may be, this is the easy part. The implementation is harder, but the implementation is where we start to derive the real value.
The forum also sought better empowerment of MSMEs towards having their commodities aligned with internationally acceptable standards for local consumption and exports. Lara Folayo, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, let's shift our focus now to global markets as stocks climbed for a second day after Britain's decision to ditch part of a controversial tax cut plan and slightly parley expectations for aggressive central bank action returned some investors' confidence. The MSCI's Brothers Index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan rose at 1.7%, led by gains in Australia, while Eurostoxx 600 traded higher at 2%, with London's FTSE gaining over 1%. S&P 500 futures rose 1%, following a 2.6% bounce for the index. On the currency market, the pound's gained 0.6% against the dollar to trade at more than $1, while the dollar slid against a basket of major currencies all around the world. Meanwhile, barely 2 weeks after its main rival, Optus, was left reeling by a massive cyber attack, Australia's largest telecoms firm, Telstra, says it has suffered another data breach on its reserves. Telstra, which has 18.8 million customer accounts, equivalent to 3/4 of Australia's population, says an intrusion of a third-party organization exposed some employee data as far back as 2017. According to a report, Telstra internal staff email puts the number of affected current and former employees at 30,000, limited to names and email addresses. Meanwhile, Australia's telecommunications, financial and government sectors have been on high alert since Optus disclosed on September 22 that a breach of its systems may have compromised up to 10 million accounts of users. The data exposed included home addresses, driver's licenses, and passport numbers across the country. And to wrap things off, oil prices on the international market rose today as expectations that OPEC Plus may agree to a large cut in crude exports output on Wednesday, offsetting concerns about the global economy. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude offers $83.90 per barrel, with an upsurge of 0.32%. The Brent crude futures also experienced an uptick of 0.42%, selling for $89.23 per barrel. Bonny Light moves away from the red zone to sell for $89.79 per barrel, with an upward price review of 1.85%. For the OPEC basket, crude oil offers $92.34 per barrel, with a price decline of 0.45%.